As an author, you need to be able to take constructive criticism, but being able to take criticism and not internalize it and actually use it in a constructive way is a skill that you have to work on, just like writing, storytelling, etc. You don't want to end up just arguing with people who are critiquing your work, because sometimes they are genuinely trying to make your work better, and it's not supposed to be a personal attack the way that you may take it as. And then if you're not taking critical feedback that you're given, even if it's good, you turn into an author who puts out subpar work and disappoints everybody who pre-ordered your book. Audrey Winters. So here are 5 tips for getting better at receiving criticism. The first thing, don't think of criticism as something that you have to argue against. If you get a critical comment on your work, whether this is like in a critique, could be on TikTok, which giving critique in authors' comment sections is a pretty big no-no, but it happens. No matter where you're getting feedback, you don't want to immediately start thinking of it as, oh, this is 100% a personal attack and there's no other possible reasoning behind it. In fact, I never recommend responding to small pieces of criticism or feedback. If somebody leaves a comment, like, for example, let's say you're doing beta reading on your book and you get a comment that's like, I don't think this sentence is working here. Like, I don't really get the point of this conversation. Something like that, that is a piece of feedback. And you as the author might be like, well, I put this conversation in here because I wanted X and Y character to have a conversation about Z. And, well, it makes sense in your head. What somebody questioning it means is that it's not working the way that you're intending it to work. So that isn't a personal attack on you. That just means that you need to make edits. And really, it's an opportunity to become a better writer. So it's not a bad thing to be getting criticism. It's actually a good thing, because you then can become a better writer. And isn't that what it's all about? My second tip is that if you are taking something personally, don't respond to the comment, journal about it. This can be in your notes app, this can be handwritten. I love a handwritten journal moment. But no matter what you're doing, don't let your immediate emotional response come across to anyone else. This does tie back to my first point about like not responding to specific criticism, but even as a whole, let's say you get back an edit letter from an editor and you're sitting there and you're like, oh my God, all of this feedback is bullshit and they don't understand my story at all and blah, blah, blah. You can write all of that out. And then afterwards, sit with it for a minute and go, well, if they completely misunderstood my story, odds are that there's something in the story that's not clear. This person isn't trying to attack me. And just because you take something as an attack doesn't mean it is. And it's totally valid to work through those feelings, but you do not need to push your feelings onto another person, because then all you're going to do is tarnish the relationship between you and whoever is giving you this constructive criticism. And let's say you respond immediately and you're like, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And the next day you read through the criticism again, you go, actually, I kind of see some of it. Well, doesn't matter. If you were rude to the person in response for the valid criticism they were giving you, they're not going to want to work with you again. You've just destroyed that relationship. And for what? Because you got a little butt hurt? Come on. Being an author is hard. You got to be ready for the hard stuff when it comes up. Point number 3, try to think of where the critic is coming from while they're giving their criticism. So let's say, I'm a 28-year-old lesbian, middle class, whatever. And so that's where I'm writing from. Whatever research I do, that's still the lens that I view the world through, no matter how much I open my mind and everything around me. And critics, in the same way, they have their own view of the world. So maybe you wrote a, queer book about the queer coming of age experience, and then you send it to a beta reader who is a straight person, and they say, I don't really connect with this, I don't get it. You know what? That's okay, because your book is not meant for everyone. Everybody doesn't have to love your book. So if you think about where they're coming from as a critic, you can kind of go through their feedback and parse through, okay, yeah, like maybe this scene doesn't make sense because this is a moment of queer yearning that really is a universal queer experience, but straight people don't really go through it. So yeah, it makes sense that they don't understand what I'm talking about. But at the same time, they might have valid criticisms in other parts of the book. Like, oh, this sentence feels awkward, this conversation, I don't know why it's here. Thinking about where they are coming from will help you work through their feedback. And another way to do that is my 4th tip, which is to try to view the feedback that you are getting and your work as a conversation that you are viewing as an outside observer and not as the creator of this piece of art that you're so emotionally attached to. Again, we're leaving our attachment issues up in tip number 2 when we're journaling about it. After that, you got to put on your big girl pants or your big boy pants or your big they them pants, I don't know, and view your story as an outside observer. I always recommend, after you finish writing anything, like give it a couple of days or like weeks, depending on the length and bulk of the project, and then go back and read it again, because it gives you just a fresh perspective when you're not so in it. And try to think of your criticism like that. So you get the criticism, you journal about it, you're having all these feelings, and then you're trying to see like what lens the critic is looking for, and then you go back to their criticism and you view it as if you have no skin in the game, as if this is just somebody else's story and feedback that was given to somebody else. Just pretend it's a fun, if you're writing fiction, writing is all make believe. So I know that you're good at making shit up. Put yourself in the shoes of, I don't know, a random guy who didn't write the story, or an alternate version of you who didn't write the story, and try to think about where that feedback can really help your story grow. If you're viewing it as yourself, you look at maybe a scene that you put in. Like a piece of feedback that I got on my book from my editor was, there's too many party scenes. The characters keep having these like big party scenes. There's like 3 or 4 in the book, and it just feels like a lot. And at first I was like, well, they're in college, or, about to go to college. Like, of course they're going to a bunch of parties. That's what kids do. And then I was like, but actually it makes sense, because just because that's the most realistic thing that might be happening, that doesn't mean that I have to write it that way. I'm already making everything else up. So I changed the party scenes to some other settings, and it ended up making my story a lot stronger. So being able to look at it as not like, well, this was my exact experience that I'm basing this off of, but as the reader, what would be more enjoyable to read? And so this kind of ties into the idea of kill your darlings, where sometimes there will be these like really pretty things that you write into your story and you're obsessed with them and you love them, and they just aren't working. And that's okay, because sometimes that sucks. It sucks to kill your darlings. That's why it's a whole thing in writing, because nobody naturally wants to do that. So the way that I personally will deal with that is, if I'm cutting out something that I really love, I'll just copy and paste it into like a kill my darlings doc, where it lives there, and now in a future project I can, scavenge from that and see if I can make something work that I love in another project. You never know. And my 5th and final piece of advice for this video is, learn the difference between valid criticism and personal attacks. If you are taking everything as a personal attack, odds are that you're missing the valid criticism. But if you're taking everything as valid criticism, you might be missing the fact that there are a few personal attacks in there. And a couple of easy ways to spot whether something is genuine criticism coming from a place of trying to make your story better and just attack to try to upset you or troll you, or, the internet is a terrible place, I know. If it's a legitimate piece of feedback, there will be specific things that, they're confused about or that need improvement. They might be pulling a quote and highlighting something specific and saying, like, this word here, I don't know if this works. I mean, that's kind of granular. Hopefully you're not getting that. It could also be a valid critique if they're talking about their personal interpretation of the work, because the way that they view it, just because it's different from how you intended it, doesn't mean that they're trying to attack you. That's just how they viewed it. They're looking at it from their perspective. Maybe they're looking at it from a third-party perspective. But either way, them giving an interpretation that doesn't align with what your intentions were is not a personal attack. But if they're just giving really harsh feedback, there's not specific enough details or examples to actually help you, or, if they're insulting your personal character, yeah, that's a personal attack. So I think of like a snark video or something like that. Like, that is not a piece of genuine criticism that they're trying to make somebody a better person. Like, snark Reddit pages, those exist to bring people down. Those are full of personal attacks. And they can say that they're trying to do constructive criticism as much as they want. That doesn't make it true. But, looking at the Audra Winter situation, which is kind of what inspired this video, the videos that other indie authors have made saying like, hey, here's how things usually go in the industry, and here's where you might have gone wrong. Like, you might have needed more time to edit, you need this, blah, blah, blah. And giving that detailed, specific advice from a place of, I want you to be better. That is constructive criticism. So those are all of my tips for learning how to take criticism better. I will say it's a long process. It's not overnight that you magically are like, oh my God, I know how to take criticism now. Amazing. That's just simply not how it works. The way that I personally learned how to start taking constructive criticism was when I was in college for English creative writing, and I would take creative writing workshops, and we would do, workshop critique days where essentially you'd bring in your poem or your short story, you'd read it. I don't think we read the whole short stories, but that's not important. And then you would have to sit there in silence for, 15, 20, 30 minutes. I can't remember how long each critique was, but you would have to sit there in silence for the length of the critique while the rest of the class talked about your piece and talked about their interpretations, their thoughts, and their feedback. Everyone in those classes, I knew was coming from a genuine place of trying to improve my writing. And that was really valuable for me because I knew that everybody who was in the class was giving constructive feedback that was meant to improve my writing because they knew that they were going to be in the same position as me. If I'm sitting there and if I'm bitching everybody else in the class out, giving all this like really annoying feedback, then you best believe that when it's my turn, everybody is going to bring that same energy to me. So you want to give the criticism that you want to get, and nobody wants to get criticism, but you want to be as constructive to other people as you want other people to be to you. So in that setting, it was very helpful for getting me to learn how to take feedback and critique in a positive way. It took a while. I remember my first critique day, I had a full-on panic attack during like just the entire class. Honestly, I think even before I went to class, I was having a panic attack, and I just continued it throughout the whole class because, anxiety is a bitch. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It is not comfortable to grow. Growing pains when you were a kid, they're not fun. But now I'm 5'7" and I wasn't before. And I was a worse writer, and then I got critiques and I got feedback and I got criticism, and it hurt, but then I processed it and I became better. So at the end of the day, the criticism that you get out of it what you put into it. So I hope that this video was helpful. If there's any other like things you want me to talk about related to like writing and critique, maybe I could make a video on like how to give constructive criticism. That one's a little bit harder of a concept, but Shakespeare, what if you weren't squeaking? Shakespeare is actually here to tell you about my debut novel, Daisy Plucked, available wherever books are sold now, mainly online. It is, indie published, but it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, all that fun stuff. It is a queer Hamlet retelling where Ophelia is the main character and has to figure out whether or not her recent ex-girlfriend and lifelong best friend Hannah, who is based off of Hamlet, was actually murdered or if it was suicide. And if you can hear my dog squeaking, same. Happy writing. Bye.